Good morning, my friends. This is the Flayer. Hope you're all doing very well today, and welcome to Q&A with the Flayer, where we talk about things that my viewers want me to talk about here in video format. So, how this works is that members of the tireless tier, Patreon supporters, will always get any question they want answered in video form and in a longer form than perhaps YouTube comment sections, for example, can allow for. I will always answer any questions they want me to address. Beyond that, just to kind of fill out the video, and also because it's getting a little hard for me to keep up with the YouTube comments, I will be choosing other comments from just about anybody that I feel are worth addressing in video form. So that's exactly what we're here to do today. Before we begin, let us say welcome and thank you to our brand new Patreon, Andre McInerney. I hope I got your name correct, my friend. And Andre is a confidant, so welcome to the fold, Andre. Thank you so much for your generous support. It means a lot to me. And you know what that means, my friends? You know what Andre has done for this channel is he has put us over the top. We have reached our goal. And that means that starting next month, donation leagues for supporters will be live. If you've been following this channel, you probably have a rough idea of how that's going to work, but stay tuned because I'm going to make an official announcement video sometime before the end of this month, so everybody knows exactly how that works, and then next month we're going to begin playing donation leagues. It's very exciting, so thanks again, Andre, and thank you, of course, to all of my Patreon supporters. Means a whole lot to me. So, without further ado, let's get into the Q&A. Alright, so first question is from a tireless patron who wished to remain anonymous, and it's basically, what are your best choices for basic lands in the Golgari deck in Green-Black Rock? Well, that is an absolutely wonderful question, and, you know, I believe that art is not entirely subjective. I think there's a lot of objectivity in art. However, taste is to some degree, perhaps a large degree, subjective, so take all this with a grain of salt, but all of these lands and then more are officially Grimflayer MTG approved for your green-black deck. So, first of all, let's take a look at this Onslaught land. Those who watch my channel know that I use this land in my leagues, and it's currently actually what I have sleeved up in paper as well. So we have, first of all, I love the old borders. I love old art. It's part nostalgia, part just the fact that the older cards are kind of higher quality to me in a lot of ways. Not necessarily design-wise, in terms of the rules, but in terms of the art and the foiling process, if you play with foils, yeah, the old cards, in my opinion, you can't go wrong. So we have an old border, Onslaught era swamp here where we've got a lot of the typical archetypes of swamp art. It's gloomy, it's murky, and there's some mist having things shrouded in mystery, right? But at the same time, there's something else going on, and the something else is really cool. There's a big forbidding fortress in the background. We're like emerging from the swamp into perhaps something even worse than the swamp, right? So that's why I love this land and why I use it. So, of course, I recommend the one that I use. However, a couple other really cool options I want to mention. I really like what's going on here. I believe this is an arena promo. This is John Avon. This one here is from Pete Venters, by the way, but this one's from John Avon. I really like the just the really cool tones here, and you can't really go wrong with John Avon. And again, we've got the old border foil. It's a beautiful, beautiful one, in my opinion. Next up, we have one of the Euro lands. The Euro lands are definitely very, very popular, and for good reason, in my opinion. They're based on real places, and this one appears to be out of France, and just look at it. I mean, we've got very unusual relative to the normal style of swamp art that you see in Magic the Gathering, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing, but in this case, I think it's a really good thing. This is just absolutely beautiful. Next up, I'll give an honorable mention to the Unglued lands. You know, this is not my favorite art, No disrespect to the artist, but it's not my favorite art of all the swamps we could choose from. But I think the unglued border is really cool. It's my favorite unset border. That's not going to be everybody's taste, and that's fine. But honorable mention to the unglued art if you want to play with a funky border. And finally, honorable mentions to snow-covered swamps. I'm one of these weird people that actually enjoys winter. Not this winter, maybe. It's gone on a little too long for me, but generally I like the aesthetics of winter. And the snow-covered lands, the fact that they have snow-covered in their title, it just gives you something cool. You can register snow-covered lands in your deck and feel like you're doing something special, right? So we've got the Ice Age printing, which is very muted and very understated, but I think it's beautiful. I really, really enjoy it. And then we, of course, have Cold Snap as well, which, if you're playing with foils, is your only real option, but definitely a very cool one in its own right as well. So, Rob Alexander. Can't really go wrong with Rob Alexander basic lands, and I really respect people who register the snow-covered lands in their deck for no reason. So, those are a few swamps that the Grimflayer approves of. For your Golgari deck, now moving on to forests, we of course have the John Avon Onslaught Forest, matching our Onslaught Swamp that I currently have sleeved up both online and in paper. This one's just completely beautiful in every way. We have the low sun breaking through the trees. Is it rising or is it setting? It's hard to tell. You could read the imagery into that, the symbolism of that, either way. And, you can see hope from the sun, but it's also still mostly shrouded in shadow, which might be a little bit more fitting for Golgari. But either way, it is absolutely beautiful. Big, big fan of this one. And that's why I use it. Probably the one I would use if I ever wanted to change things up. I would have to get my hands on these. But the Arena promo version of this art that... does it originate in Ice Age? I think it does, from Pat Morrissey. Oh my goodness, this is just breathtaking in my opinion. The pink is what does it. The pink is what puts it over the top. But we love the winter landscape. It's very realistic, but it's still very evocative. Just completely beautiful. Again, I'm a sucker for the winter theme. What can I say? So that's probably my second place choice there. And then we have another Euro land, just like we have a Euro swamp. We've got a Euro forest. This one is also depicting a location in France. And just look at it. Again, it stands out relative to the normal Magic the Gathering art, perhaps because it is so realistic. And I think it's extremely well done. Definitely would make your basic forest stand out if you chose this land to run with. Here's another one from Pete Venters, who is, of course, the artist behind our Onslaught Swamp. This one's really cool. I really like everything about it, including that little hut off to the side. A lot of the times I don't actually enjoy adding objects or people or things to the basic land beyond what is normally depicted in the land, but in this case I think it works really well, and it is suitable for Golgari in my opinion, because it's still pretty gloomy in here, and this could be, like a witch's hut or something, so definitely approve this one. Once again, we'll mention the unglued due mostly to the border, but I do really like the art here as well. Therese Nielsen is awesome, and yeah, this is a great forest. This is a great piece. Finally, we'll take a look at the snow-covered lands, which, as I said, is definitely viable inclusion in your deck. And this is a cool piece by Pat Morrissey, who did this one we were just loving a minute ago. And I like this one a lot. We've got the landscape mostly buried in snow, but this cairn, or this runic stone is still visible, and that's pretty sweet. And again, I just love old cards in general, so. Finally, we have Snow-Covered Forest from Cold Snap, and this one's beautifully done. It is, things look hard frozen, right? Like, it's definitely just gives you, makes you chilled just looking at it. You can imagine this forest just never ending, it's kind of eternal winter here, right? So this is excellently done, and again, awesome in foil, right? So I hope that answers your question, my friend, and of course, there's plenty of other options out there. That's one of the coolest things about this game, is the sheer plethora of basic land art. So like I said, there's some degree of subjectivity here, but those are my thoughts. And really, I just want to see you guys giving some thought to your lands, right? Caring for your basic lands and taking the time to make a reasonable decision about them. So let's move on to the next question. Alright, I hope that helped, and the next question is from Ronald Poon, who is a good friend of the channel. We love Ronald on this channel, and he's always got the real questions, and this is definitely one of them. So Ronald says, "Hi Grim, I have a question for you. You mentioned that Humans is one of your favorite decks to play against with the Rock. Can you list the top 5 or top 10 decks you like to play against? I think you mentioned Burn one time." Ronald is correct. I have mentioned that both Humans and Burn are matches that I really enjoy playing. So what we're going to do is just take a quick scroll through the modern metagame on MTG Goldfish, and I'll point out some of the other decks I really like playing against and why. So from this top tier, Phoenix now, Dredge now, Tron now, Humans. I really like playing against Humans because it feels like Magic as intended, basically. We have good interaction on both sides of the table, and it's interesting, varied interaction. And both decks are powerful but fair. Both decks are doing kind of traditional, executing kind of a traditional game plan to win, but in a very powerful way. And it feels like the games play out so differently every time we play them. Sometimes they open on Noble Hierarch into Mantis Rider, and you're under the gun right away. Sometimes they've got a more disruption-heavy start with like Thalias and Kitesail freebooters and Meddling Mages. Sometimes they just go really wide, or they go really tall with Champions of the Parish and Thalia's Lieutenants. And sometimes they're trying to tempo you out with the Reflector Mages. And of course, on our side of the table, it's very different too. We can rip their hand apart with early discard, we can control the board with removal, or we can be on kind of a protect the queen plan where we're taking over the game with a Liliana and desperately trying to keep her alive so she gets so much advantage. Or we are just brawling along the ground with them with massive Tarmogoyfs. And then Dark Confidant, can be really good or a little sketchy, so there's an element of chance and there's a thrill to that. So I love the Humans matchup, big fan. Nothing else in this top tier really strikes me as enjoyable. Burn, like Ronald said, is another one I've mentioned before. He's correct. I Burn for similar reasons to Humans, honestly, although their starts are a little bit less varied. I really enjoy how important every little decision is against Burn. Your early sequencing is huge. It's absolutely huge. And whereas Humans is a 50-50 matchup, in my opinion, I think we are a little bit favored against Burn. So, I'm only human. I like to win. I definitely am not going to say this super unfavorable matchup is my favorite one to play, right? So most of these are going to be 50-50 plus, but still, Burn is very exciting. It's a thrill, and I consider Burn a fair deck. I consider Burn a good, reasonable deck, a good police deck for the format. And it's really cool how well a lot of our stuff naturally lines up against them. Like, just sticking a big Tarmogoyf against Burn. Sometimes they get locked out by their own Eidolon because our Tarmogoyfs are so huge. We maneuver into a position where Skoos can take over the game. All of this stuff, it's a very, very cool matchup to play. And it's still, it's still a one that you have to respect. So I like that a lot. None of these others are the most exciting here for me. 4-Color Prison is a deck that we really are very favored against, but even so, not my favorite to face. Moving on, here in this third row, Ad Nauseam is a deck I really enjoy facing, mostly because I think Ad Nauseam is really cool. It is by far my favorite combo deck. I used to play it before I went on the one true path of Golgari. I think Ad Nauseam is super cool. And of course, we play a very high density of answers to their non-creature permanents. We have the pulses, the trophies, the decays to answer their stuff like Leyline of Sanctity post-board, but even pre-board, the Lotus Bloom, the Pentad Prism, the Phyrexian Unlife. And our hand disruption is good, and it's cool to be the aggro here, to try to stick a threat and race while disrupting. I kind of like that role, as long as it doesn't feel too hopeless like it sometimes does against Valakut, where your interaction is not necessarily that meaningful. But the interaction's meaningful against Ad Nauseam. I think it's a really cool deck in its own right, so I enjoy that matchup for sure. Nothing else really stands out to me from those decks. Here, Hollow One, Titan Shift, Bogles, Prison, Jeskai, yeah, no thanks. Eldrazi decks, no thanks. Mardu Pyromancer, yeah, I'm not so much a fan of the mid-range mirrors as you might know. Living End is miserable. What else do we really like playing against? Let's see. I really like beating Free Win Red. I don't know that I like playing against it, but I really like beating these Free Win decks. I despise them kind of philosophically, right? So it always feels good to beat the decks that are trying to play non-games of Magic, as I see it. Merfolk is a pretty fun matchup. I used to hate the Merfolk matchup. My good buddy, he's the Dogfish on MTGO, mains Merfolk. I used to hate it when I played Abzan, because your Path to Exiles are clunky, your Lingering Souls, they just island walk past it a lot of the time, your Bob Flips are sometimes more painful, Spreading Seas is a beating, but now that I'm on straight Golgari, the Rock is a lot more, all those things are a lot less true, and it becomes a really interesting matchup, kind of along the lines of humans, right? They're trying to do fair things, they're trying to win through a fair progression of creatures, and it's cool to compete on that front. I like playing against creatures that stay dead. I like playing against things that stay dead when you kill them. So Merfolk is definitely a fun matchup. What else? Lantern Control, Martyr Proc. No, thank you. We can put elves in the same category. I like playing against the tribal decks, I guess. The tribal decks are pretty fun. Spirits, not so much because of the hexproof lock. It's a little absurd, but the other tribal decks, all cool with me. They're always very fun, pretty skill-testing matchups, right? Anything else we want to mention here? Rakdos Burn. Yep, I like playing against that. That's definitely a fun one, too. Let's see here. Mono Red Phoenix, we might have glanced over, one with a higher meta share. I think that's more fun to face than the Izzet Phoenix decks, just because the absurdity of a million cantrips is not present. Mono Red Phoenix is a very interesting matchup. I think we can say that's a fun one to face, in my humble opinion. 8-Rack Mill, we're getting into the more fringe decks down here, so I don't know how much further we want to go, but I think I've given you at least 5 of my favorite decks to face, and yeah. See if there's anything cool lurking down here. Yeah, maybe not so much, so I hope that answers your question, Ronald. Those are some of my favorite decks to face with the Rock. Okay, next question is from Bazooka Bill. Bazooka says, great content as always, my friend. I got a question. What do you think about a one of Courser of Krufix in the deck? Saw it a couple weeks ago in some rock decks on MTG Goldfish. She's got a decent body, true. Gives you at least pseudo card advantage, true. And you can manipulate your Bob triggers if you've got the opportunity to fetch or to field. Also, the life gain is not bad. All true. Good points, Bazooka Bill. And I can't disagree with any of them. That is all empirically correct. But what do we think about this card in the deck? Well, it's a 2/4 for 3. So if we compare it to our other 3-drops like Tireless Tracker or like the Planeswalkers, I think it's pretty clearly less proactive, either as a way to threaten to start ending the game or a way to answer the board. So that's the first issue with Courser, is it's just a little more dirtily, a little less proactive. The second issue with Courser is this double green. Our deck is pretty well maximized in terms of the land base to make double black on turn 3, while also playing enough utility in the land base and enough basic lands where we are able to compete on the front of interacting with lands very, very well. So in order to fulfill both of those criteria, the criteria of making double green on turn 3 is not as readily fulfilled. Now, we do play a Kitchen Finks in our sideboard, that much is true. So it's not like the double green is unplayable, far from it. But it's just another little point against the Courser. So, a lot of things to consider here. Why would we play the Courser? Why would we not? Well, I think the Courser would shine the most in a metagame that is heavy on burn and on aggro decks that attack along the ground, like Zoo. If Zoo was tier 1, if other decks along the lines of Zoo were tier 1, plus, of course, burn, we would love the Courser. And Courser is also very good against mid-range decks because the grindy pseudo-advantage, like Bazooka Bill mentioned, that's all very true. We can manipulate the top of our deck when the games go long and or when we have linear aggressive decks attacking along the ground where a 2/4 body is really good. I think Courser is good. Do we have that meta right now? Not so much. Not so much. When we saw in the previous question, I was going down the meta game, and burn has dropped off pretty significantly. We also, frankly, have better cards to play against burn anyway, right? Like, I think Kitchen Finks is still better than Courser against burn. I only have 2 Collective Brutality, so if we're really teching against burn, it's probably going to be with those cards more than a Courser of Truffix. Now, like I said, Courser good against mid-range too, no question about that. But then again, so is Kitchen Finks, right? So, all in all, like, I think Courser is super, super reasonable. I would never look at somebody's list, and especially if it's only a one of Courser, like Bazooka Bill said, and be like, oh, Courser, that's wrong. What are you doing with that Courser? I think it's very, very close to being like, yeah, solid pick. I think the metagame kind of has to be good enough for it to really line up perfectly, though, and I don't think we're there yet. I think playing the third Tireless Tracker is better than playing the first Courser, in my opinion. Maybe you could say Courser number 1 is better than Tracker number 4, but I don't think we want either right now. I don't think we want either at the moment. So for me, close but no cigar. I hope that helps. Next up is another question from Ronald Poon. Ronald says, amazing plays, Grim. True, very true. Amazing plays, Grim. I watched a 1080p MTGO cast lately and it's quite a bit better. It's easier to read all the small text. Is this a possible upgrade for your channel in the future? 720 is decent already, but 1080 is so nice on the eyes. If you need us to help you do some research, let us know. Yeah, you know, that's probably something I should do. This is a good call, Ronald. When I started this channel, I knew not a single thing about creating videos, and to be fair, I still don't know that much. I've always kind of been a bare bones guy, like, let's just get the content out there and not worry about getting flashy. So, a friend recommended 2 programs to me. The friend recommended iSpring FreeCam or OBS, Open Broadcasting Software, and this friend said that iSpring was a little bit more beginner friendly, and OBS is definitely a strong one if you want to get into the editing side of things a little bit more. So I just said I want it as easy as possible, so I went with iSpring, and I have had no issues with iSpring. It's been very, very good, very easy, very user friendly, very straight up. However, it's only got the max capacity for 720p, so let me know what you think in the comments, guys. 1080p, I realize that's definitely more desirable. If I have time in the near future, I'll maybe start messing around with OBS. I'll maybe get that and see if that's easy enough for me to use. Maybe we'll just switch to that and get some 1080p videos up there for you. But if you have any suggestions or feedback about this, please let me know. Okay, next up we have a comment from Dan Galinas. Dan is a patron, and Dan is a very, very insightful commenter on the YouTube channels. If you guys ever are in the learning mood, if you're ever in the mood to kind of broaden your horizons, sharpen your mind on the whetstone of some good feedback, find a Dan Galinas comment in my videos and go through the timestamps and see what he's saying. You know, here we could have fetched a basic, you know, I think it's right to fetch a basic, rather. Here, any consideration for spellbombing yourself to keep the pushes in your deck. All these little lines, you know, I cannot possibly mention every little line as I go through, partially because the videos would be even longer than they already are, partially because I frankly don't see every little possibility. So a lot of the times Dan will pick up on something that either I thought but didn't mention or that I missed entirely. One or the other. Either way, very well worth looking at. We're not going to go through all of them here, but I encourage you guys, if you're in the mood, go ahead and do so yourself. What I do want to address that Dan mentioned here is this. Have you read Flying Delver's article about sideboarding against Tron on mtgrock.com? I'll answer that real quick. Yes, I have, and they, Flying Delver also, for those who have not seen my previous video, now has his own website, greatnessatatanycost.com, so check that out for more info on sideboarding and general stuff about BG Rock and other BGX decks. So Dan says, Delver recommends bringing in Finks with a similar reason to why you argue that Nissa is worth it. Thoughts on the relative effectiveness of our underpowered threats in the matchup, thinking of Finks and Ooze. Finks surviving an O-Stone activation is marginally interesting to me. Alright, Dan, well that's a good question, and Oblivion Stone is definitely a big reason why we would be weighing the relative efficacy of Finks, of Nissa, of Skoos, stuff like that. So, of course, it's nice that Finks will come back after they crack an O-Stone. And O-Stone, there are these matchups where you are disrupting Tron, keeping them off of Tron very well, but perhaps your clock is a little bit anemic or even non-existent. One of the best cards they can have against us in that situation, or even sometimes if they do have Tron, is Oblivion Stone. This card is absolutely backbreaking, but it's really, really good because, of course, they can hardcast it on 3. They can even put a fate counter on something turn 4 if they want to, and then on turn 5 they can wipe our board. So the thing that that Delver has argued for, apparently, and also that Dan is wondering about, is Finks good? Basically because it's going to come back from the O-Stone, and we're comparing it to Scavenging Ooze, which is not much more than a Grizzly Bear, and we're also maybe comparing it to Nissa Vital Force. Now, the reason Nissa is good is because against an O-Stone effect, or against Karn, or against Ugin, those things are going to come down, they're going to wipe our board, or in the case of Karn, they're going to remove our best permanent, right? Then you can untap, you can play your Nissa, and if they played a Planeswalker that they had to minus, you can animate a land and finish off the Planeswalker. That's the idea. Or if it's just the O-Stone, you can just attack them. The clock is real with Nissa. It's a 5/5 haste, basically. And there are some scenarios in which you can buy back a permanent and all that stuff, or eventually use her ult, but really she's mostly just an attacker with haste, basically. And the haste is huge against Tron, for the reasons that I just mentioned. It's one of the only realistic ways to get rid of their Planeswalkers besides spot removal, without just going so far behind it's insane. So, do we want Kitchen Finks? Well, that, I think, depends upon your curve more than anything. The big appeal to me for keeping in Scavenging Ooze over Finks, even though we might cut a Skoos, that's fine, but the reason I like Skoos over Finks is because against Tron, more than almost any other deck, we want to go turn 1, Disruption, turn 2, Threat, turn 3, go back to Disrupting. Now, this is true in general for BGX, but it is so true against Tron because on 3, not only do we have Liliana of the Veil, in Maelstrom Pulse, if they play an Oblivion Stone out on 3, for instance, we have Field of Ruin activation, we have Fulminator Mage, or we just have Assassin's Trophy, which of course can be cast on 2 as well, and if you're on the draw, you might need to, but if we can afford to stick any threat turn 2 and then go back to Disrupting turn 3, we are just so much better off, because Tron is so consistent that they can keep cantripping, they can keep tutoring, they can keep rebuilding, that, if we have to take turn 2 to disrupt, we might have to take turn 3 and turn 4 and so on and so forth. So it is so crucial to take that turn 2 window to play a threat, any threat. Obviously, we want Tarmogoyf or we want Dark Confidant. Those are both way, way, way better than Skoos. However, Skoos is still a threat. Skoos is still going to put them on some kind of a clock. And, it can help get us there. I think it's so crucial to have the turn 2 threat. So, at the end of the day, it's going to really depend upon the configuration of your 75, of course. But I personally rate Finks a little bit lower than Ooze and a little bit lower than Nissa, because again, Ooze has the ability to come down turn 2. That's really why it's better than Finks. That's the only reason it's better than Finks, but to me it's important enough. And Nissa, just argues, just gives us a different dimension altogether. Gives us a top end, gives us a haste threat. That's really what it's about. So, in my opinion, I would rate Nissa and Skooz a little bit more highly than Finks, but I understand that Finks does have the ability to survive O-Stone or just removal in general, and it's definitely worth considering. So that is my thoughts on what you brought to the table, Dan. I hope that helped. Okay, everybody, final question we're going to answer in this Q&A today. I hope you all have enjoyed this. This is from Mike Kingsley, and Mike, much like our previous questioner, Dan, has got some fantastic insight, very thorough, very well thought out. So thanks to everybody who gives feedback, but especially to Dan and Mike for this really the long form critique or feedback. So once again, we're not going to go through everything here, but again, if you're in the mood to learn, there's definitely many worse things you could do than go through comments like this. So the first thing we'll talk about briefly is Mike's thoughts on the Martyr proc matchup. They make great use of ETB effects and Proclamation of Rebirth. What if we keep in Thoughtseizing Inquisition, side out Liliana of the Veil? Gives us more control over their end rather than Lily kind of allowing them to discard whatever they don't need. Also, do we need Nissa out of the board? She's a good closer, but the lands don't trample by the time we can cast her. Skooz and Kalitas might be as powerful, while being easier to cast in disrupting the OP's game plan. What do you think about this plan? So, Mike is talking about taking out all Lilianas of the Veil, cutting Blooming Marsh and a Tarmogoyf like I did, he likes that, adding EE Deathmark, Maelstrom, Pulse Damnation, Liliana the Last Hope, and +1 Spellbomb. I'm unsure whether to cut, keep, or add a Brutality. So, let's start at the end there with the Brutality. Me too. And I like, when I'm in doubt, I like to just leave the one main deck one in there, because you can always pretty much make decent use of one Brutality. It's just a matter of if you've got too many clunking up your progression, or if you know they're actively bad. We don't want necessarily to go down to 0 or up to 2 unless we know it's correct. So I'm usually fine just leaving exactly 1. I think we can almost always leverage exactly 1 to pretty solid effect. And I also feel the same way about Liliana of the Veil. You will almost never see me cut all 4 Liliana of the Veils in any kind of a creature matchup, because she is surprisingly decent in the context of the rest of a good progression otherwise, even when she's not at her best, as exactly 1 copy of her. So I see what you're saying here, Mike. I like the idea, and I think there's a lot of merit to it. I would probably leave still 1 Liliana of the Veil in, though, for that exact reason. Now, I do think we want Nissa out of the board. You're correct that the lands don't trample, they can chump her for days, but remember that they are going to also sweep up the board, so it's nice to potentially either minus her and buy back an important permanent that they've destroyed, or tick her up to try to keep pressuring the board and battering through the weenies. In the game that we saw here in this league, I was pretty far behind both games. I never was really close to winning, but if we're a little at parity, Nissa really will break parity one way or the other. I think when the game is guaranteed to go this long, I think we definitely want the Nissa. Even though the points you make are correct, I still think we want the Nissa. And, I definitely see the merit of being a little bit heavier on hand disruption, but I think we can still afford to cut just a tad, just a little bit of it. Again, we treat this like a mid-range mirror. I have a very good record in mid-range mirrors in the Shadow matchup, and I think a big part of that is that my top decks are just really live, because I cut all the discard away. Now, I agree with you that it's a little bit better positioned here, but ultimately, I think I would meet you halfway, basically, with this suggestion. I think you've got a lot of merit here, and I think I would like to meet you halfway between what you suggest and what I did in this video. So, more testing needed, but I like where your head's at, Mike, and I think you're onto something here. What else do we have here? So, if Mike says, when sideboarding versus Thalia Stompy, if bringing in the Brutality is loose, isn't the one in the main deck loose as well? How about cutting it and keeping one more Inquisition? Note how it would have affected your opening hand that game. So here I refer you to what I said in the previous point about Martyr proc. I think we can usually leverage exactly one Brutality pretty well, and remember here that it does kill Leonin Arbiter. It does kill both Thalias, so I think we don't want the second one, but the first one is fine. I didn't quite explain that in the sideboard video, but I think, again, exactly one is pretty much accurate here. Again, in the opening hand, yes, Inquisition is definitely is definitely always nice in your opener, right? But again, when you are in a matchup like this that you know is grindy, and when you know that these 2-drops especially can really cheese you out of the game, I think keeping in the Collective Brutality there, I think that's where we want to be. So I do stand by that decision. Finally, several times I notice you side out discard spells, then comment that it would be nice to have them in the opening hand. I realize sometimes we need to concede the board to faster decks and focus on removal and threats. As I have in the past, though, I'd again encourage you to consider keeping in more hand disruption, especially versus decks that rely on spells and ETB effects. So, this is a totally fair point. First of all, let's address this. I notice you side out discard spells, then comment that it would be nice to have them in the opening hand. I would say that these are not mutually exclusive. Like, I can say, for example, against Affinity, that Thoughtseize is bad and should come out. And even though we've taken out some discard spells, it would still be really nice to have our Inquisition in the opening hand. I don't think those 2 points are necessarily mutually exclusive, even though there is kind of an inherent contradiction to them. It can still be correct to really want your Inquisition in your opener, while also saying, yes, Thoughtseize is bad in this matchup. So, that's what I'd say to that. And then, you know, you're absolutely correct here, Mike. I realize sometimes we need to concede the board to faster decks, focus on removal and threats. As I've said in the past, though, I'd encourage you to keep in more hand disruption, especially versus spells and ETB effects. So true. And this is the great paradox of discard, right? Like, we rely on it to stay in the game, to disrupt the opponent on our terms before they can curve out perfectly, and that allows us to have a window to deploy our Tarmogoyf, or to outgrind them with our value permanence without getting run over before they can get going, right? So it's all a very delicate balance, and that's why it's so rewarding to spend so much time practicing with the deck, thinking about sideboarding, you know, tweaking your 75, all of that stuff. And you're so correct, Mike, that the ETB effects, it's really tempting, and it's really correct to some degree to keep in your discard so you can take those away before they get the ETB effect. Very, very true. However, it's really a matter of your exact configuration, and it's really a matter of taste. I freely admit that I am probably on the far end of the spectrum in terms of how many discard spells I side out and how often I do so. I prefer to not lose to my top decks. I have faith in the structure of my deck that having a little bit more of a limited access to the targeted discard post board is worth the trade-off of having more answers in the side. Now, if your 75 is different, this is going to be different for you. A lot of people are not playing Engineered Explosives. I am. A lot of people are not playing a second Maelstrom Pulse. I am. A lot of people aren't playing a second Liliana the Last Hope. I am. So I have a lot of catch-up cards. I have a lot of, like, 3-drops, basically, that can really pull me back into the game. So I prefer, and I think it's correct, to be a little less dependent upon the Inquisitions and the Thoughtseizes, and a little more dependent on the answer cards, given the structure of my 75. However, I'm always willing to learn. I'm always willing to revise my sideboarding protocols if they prove to be incorrect or suboptimal. And I think you're absolutely right that I'm probably pushing the limit on how often I side out discard and how many copies I tend to side out. I don't think I'm beyond the limit, but I might be pushing it. So I hear you loud and clear, Mike. I'll definitely keep that in mind going forward, my friend. And I think you make some really good points here. So thanks for the feedback. I hope that helps. Okay, my friends, this has been Q&A with the Flayer, March 2019 edition. Thank you so much for watching. I hope all of the questions that I addressed were answered to your satisfaction. Remember that if you are a member of the tier list here on Patreon, you can always ask me anything, and I will address it in long form on a video to the best of my ability. Thank you, speaking of patrons, once again to our newest, Andre McInerney, the Confidant. Thank you again, Andre. And everybody, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned to the channel. I have just played another league that I will be recording a replay of maybe tomorrow, maybe Tuesday. So, new league coming, donation leagues coming next month. So keep your eyes, as always, on this channel. And thank you to everybody supporting it in any way you can. Remember, please, to subscribe on YouTube if you've not already done so. That's a big help, as well as the support on Patreon. Those are the two best ways to support this channel if you enjoy this content. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you soon. I hope you have a great day.